I called the July 6th school board meeting to order for organization of the Bristol, Virginia School Board. At this time, would everyone join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, I would accept nominations for the chairman or the chairperson of the board.
I nominate Steve Fletcher for school board chair. I second.
Any other nominations? All right. As Ms. Jones gets back to her table, all the nominations will end, and Mr. Fletcher is the nominee for school board chairman. Ms. Jones.
Mr. Alvis.
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes.
Mr. Foster.
Yes.
Mr. Goodpasture.
Yes.
Mr. White.
Yes. You do the rest. On you. The rest on me. This time I'd like to take nominations for election of vice chair.
Mr. Chairman, I make a nomination for Randy White, Vice Chair.
Second. Nominations for Mr. Randy White for vice chair. Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alvis.
Yes.
Mr. Foster.
Yes.
Mr. Goodpasture.
Yes.
Mr. White.
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes. Next is for the, take nomination for election of school board clerk. Do I have any nominations?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we nominate Tammy Jones as clerk for the school board.
Second. Nomination and a second for Ms. Jones. Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alvis.
Yes.
Mr. Foster.
Yes.
Mr. Goodpasture.
Yes.
Mr. White.
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes. Next, do I have nominations for election of school board deputy clerk? Mr. Chairman, I nominate Stephanie Austin as the deputy clerk.
Second.
Nomination and a second. Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alvis.
Yes.
Mr. Foster.
Yes.
Mr. Goodpasture.
Yes.
Mr. White.
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes. Okay, congratulations, everyone. Okay, next on is the schedule of board meetings. Everyone reviewed that?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would just point out that our typical date is the first Monday of each month. However, September, the first Monday, is on Labor Day and schools will be closed. We have a recommendation for September the 14th for that meeting. And then for March 1st, that is when we have our spring break scheduled, and we've recommended moving that to the second Monday in March, which is March 8th.
Mr. Chairman, I move the approval of our school board meeting dates. Second. Okay, Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alvis.
Yes.
Mr. Foster.
Yes.
Mr. Goodpasture.
Yes.
Mr. White.
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes. Committee appointments by chair. Open these. Show that right here. Bear with me. Career Technical Education Committee, as of right now, last year it was Randy Alice and Tyrone Foster. You guys good with staying with that? Or?
I am, Mr. Chairman. That, career and technical is something that's close to me, my heart, so I'd love to stay on that committee.
Travis, you okay with that? I'm good. Communications Committee is myself and was Ron Cameron. Mr. Goodpasture, would you be willing to serve on that?
I think that's
Normally that's
usually chaired by.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. White? Yeah. Would you be willing to serve with me on that committee? Okay, sorry. Communications. Yes. Next one is the Advanced Programs Committee. Randy Alvis and Steve Fletcher. I'm good with that. Just stay there. I'm good with that. Curriculum Committee, Mr. White. Yeah. Mr. Cameron. How about Mr. Goodpasture? Sounds good. Thank you. Special Education Committee, Mr. Foster and Mr. White. Still good there? Okay. Health Committee, Mr. Foster and Mr. Alvis.
I was getting ready to give that up to Mr. Goodpasture if he wanted to, but that's.
Are they still meeting late afternoon and that?
Yeah, but it was kind of spotty. I know we had some stuff, but a lot of times when they rescheduled it, I wasn't able to attend, so.
Well, is that okay? Health Committee?
Health Committee.
You want me to take that?
That's Foster.
And let's see, the Technology Committee is Mr. Foster and Mr. White. They give me 4. Okay. I'm on the governor's school board. I don't mind continuing that.
Technology just totally escapes me. I'd come up here to get my phone fixed. So.
Mr. Foster, are you willing to stay on that committee? Or do you think we ought to?
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I can stay on it, or if Mr. Goodpasture wants a part of it, or try to develop up as evenly as we can. Or Mr. Alvis. I don't want to hold on to something that somebody else wants a hand at.
What time of the day is that?
That's my problem.
Where's the chapter?
It's normally 3:30.
How often does that meet, Jeff?
We really just meet when it's needed. I mean, we didn't even meet last year. So very.
I'll stay on it.
Well, Mr. Foster, do we need 2 on that? We're supposed to have 2 on there. I'll do it for Mr. Foster.
I said I'll stay on it. You're chairman. You don't need to be tied up in a whole lot of committees. You have to travel a lot.
Okay. All right. Mr. Goodpat? Thank you.
No,
That's the Technology Committee.
Old dogs. New
Well,
tricks.
it only meets once every 2 years.
That's plenty.
As needed. Okay, we've got Mr. Foster and Mr. Goodpasture for the Technology Committee. And then I'll continue on the Governor's School Board.
Do we have meeting dates for these committees yet, so I can put it on the calendar?
Can we,
Mr. Chairman, I will have Ms. Austin develop a calendar of those so that you know well in advance.
That'd be great. Thank you, Doctor. We need a motion with those changes that we discussed. Do I need to read them again if I can remember?
Motion to approve the committees as amended will be fine.
Okay.
I would prefer clarification to make sure I receive that.
I have them all.
You want me to just repeat them?
Sure. That'd be great.
The career and technical, Mr. Alvis and Mr. Foster. Communications committee, Mr. Fletcher and Mr. White. Advanced programs, Mr. Alvis, Mr. Fletcher. Curriculum, Mr. White, Mr. Goodpaster. Special education, Mr. Foster and Mr. White. Health committee, Mr. Foster and Mr. Goodpaster. Technology, Mr. Goodpaster and Mr. Foster. Is that correct?
I think so. Thank you.
Motion should be a motion to approve as presented by the clerk. Second.
Ms. Jones?
I'm sorry, who was second?
Mr. White. Mr. Goodpasture.
Mr. Alvis,
Yes.
Mr. Foster,
Yes.
Mr. Goodpaster,
Yes.
Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes.
Does Mr. Foster have 5 on that? Really?
Did I wind up with 5, Ms. Jones? Four. Thank you.
Next is discussion of annual board retreat. Go ahead, Dr. Ferris.
Mr. Chairman, as is the practice of this board, we annually get together in the summertime to develop board goals for the following school year. Typically, we would have had this scheduled. However, since we have a change in our board this year, we wanted to wait until this meeting to schedule it. So we could either try to come up with a date tonight, or I can have Ms. Austin send everyone a few dates that we can meet sometime in early to mid-July to develop the school board goals for school year 2020-2021. It's your preference, Mr. Chairman.
I'm not going anywhere, so whenever y'all want to do it, it's fine with me.
I'm pretty flexible, especially during the week.
Anybody going anywhere?
We'd be on weekends, so we're not going on. Just so it's not on weekend. If it's a weeknight, we're doing it locally.
In the evenings, like, we normally 6 o'clock or something. Want to do that? Let's do that. Is that okay, Mr. Goodpaster? We'll just email, Stephanie can email some dates to us.
Is the water miles still acceptable if that is available? Okay.
I think that's,
We'll work on a couple of options to get that sent out to the board with preference and get notification out to the community that is being held as well.
thank you. With that, this organizational meeting with Bristol, Virginia School Board, July 6th. It is adjourned. Thank you. board meeting to order. We've already done the pledge. So, go right into approval of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda. Second.
Jones?
Mr. Alves?
Yes.
Mr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Goodpaster? Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher?
Yes. Thank you. First up is the superintendent's report. Dr. Parrish.
There's a little delay. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and community members, thank you for attending our first school board meeting of the fiscal year. Congratulations, Mr. Fletcher, on returning as chair. Mr. White, as vice chair, glad you're back with us, and congratulations to Mr. Foster for being reelected, and Mr. Goodpasture, welcome to the board. Glad to have you all. You too, Mr. Alves. I'll just report very briefly. We'll talk more in depth about this later on in the agenda. But last week we did have our first full committee meeting for reopening schools. We have over 60 community stakeholders involved in this process. The first draft of the plan was developed by our leadership team, and it was very well received. We're now working in small groups to allow staff, parents, and students to provide their input about our plan. We hope to have the final version by July 15th so that we can get that out for public review and for public input as well. Our board, I would anticipate, will consider approving this plan at our August 2nd school board meeting, and we want to get the information out as quickly as possible because we know our plan will have a big impact on families as they plan for child care, work schedules, etc. Some good ideas have already came from our committee meeting. One of those is from our very own Vice Chairman, Mr. White, who suggested that we create a frequently asked questions page for the public to access. And so we've already got that up and running, and those frequently asked questions will continue to add to those as questions are asked frequently. So we're excited about our plan. Mr. White and Mr. Goodpasture did attend that committee meeting. I think that we had a room full of folks here, and I think we're on the right track. It won't be perfect, but I think it'll be a good, well thought out plan that puts kids first. Our plan is also receiving good reviews from other school divisions. Some are actually using our plan as a model. In fact, as we have shared our plans with other school divisions, the idea developed to have a summit for rural school divisions to share strategies. We just got word right before this meeting started that will occur on July 20th. We will have in-person options at the Southwest Higher Ed Center, the Southside Higher Ed Center, the New College Institute in Martinsville, and Fluvanna High School. And then we will have virtual options open to anybody across the state who wants to attend virtually. And this year we're opening up the summit because of the topic that we're going to be focused on. We're opening it up to all National Rural Education Association members. So good opportunity for Bristol to highlight our plan, but also to ethically replicate some other good plans that folks are using out there. Moving on to another topic, you'll see on our agenda tonight that you will be considering a bid for replacing the pool liner at Virginia High School. However, I think you'll be surprised to learn that we received no bids on replacing the pool roof. Mr. Buckles and I are meeting first thing in the morning to discuss our next steps to determine if we are going to continue with Thompson & Litton and just do a rebid, or if we're going to take the reins of that ourselves and bid it out in-house. Typically I would discuss progress towards meeting our school board goals from last year at this meeting. However, you can tell we've got a full agenda tonight, so I will provide that report to you at our board retreat and to the public, hopefully at our August school board meeting. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for this evening. I'm happy to entertain any questions.
I do want to thank you, Dr. Parrish, and everyone on the committees for all your hard work.
I'll mention later, we have a phenomenal team who's put together a pretty good first draft.
May I ask all board members please speak directly into your mic for our hearing audience on the web? Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Jones.
Ms. Venus will be up here.
Next is item 3, consent agenda. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alvis,
Yes.
Mr. Foster,
Yes.
Mr. Goodpaster.
Yes.
Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes. Next is item 4, action items. 4A, approval of contract purchase greater than $50,000 for iPads.
Mr. Chairman, the board was made aware of the need for this purchase between tonight and our last meeting in order to ensure that our primary age students have access to a technology device that makes sense for them. There's a large back order on iPads. And so anyway, this money we will use our CARES Act funding to purchase those, and it will ensure that in case that we have to do completely remote or a hybrid version of instruction, that our primary age students have access to an appropriate device.
The 52, well, do I need a motion first and then discuss?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve, for the approval of the contract purchase greater than $50,000 for the iPads.
Second.
Any discussion? My question, the 52 10-pack, so is that 520 iPads? Okay, I didn't know if 10-pack was some slang for a type of iPad or what. Okay. Anyone else? Discussion?
Is this classroom use?
I will defer to Mr. Shelton and Mr. Ritchie on this, but they will be used in the classroom. However, if we have to go to remote learning because we have an increase in transmission in our community, then those iPads would go home with the students so that they could use those for remote learning.
So they would be assigned just like a regular laptops are to the other students in the district.
Yes, sir, they will not be shared, that's what's right.
Yeah, that's what I was asking. Thank you.
$373 each.
That is a bargain. Relatively speaking, if you try to purchase that by yourself, you'll certainly not get a price like that.
We don't have any choice also.
Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alvis,
Yes.
Mr. Foster,
Yes.
Mr. Goodpaster.
Yes.
Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes. Thank you, gentlemen. Next item, approval of contract purchase greater than $50,000 for a pool liner. Dr. Perigin?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, as you know, earlier, I guess late May, early June, we started losing water at the swimming pool at Virginia High School. We have not had any significant work done on that in probably a decade. However, we lost over 300,000 gallons of water in a matter of a couple of weeks. We actually have some folks coming in to do some geo-testing underneath the pool to make sure that there are not sinkholes underneath the pool that are causing that. However, the most efficient and warranty-based fix that we have is to purchase a liner. The low bid came in around $69,000. We could hire some folks to come in and repair that pool itself. However, I'd be afraid that with the amount of money that we'd spend, we'd be doing that every other year or so in order to keep the pool from leaking water. And so my recommendation is that the board approve the purchase of this liner contingent upon a good test from the geo-engineers that are coming in tomorrow. Mr. Buckles can answer more questions technically if you have those questions.
How many bids did you get?
We had 3 bids. Those are attached to your document and to your board docs, and you can see there was quite a significant difference. It's my understanding, Mr. Buckles, correct me if I'm wrong, but this pool liner company did the pool liner at the Harry Coombs Center in Abingdon, and they've been satisfied, to my knowledge, with the success of that liner.
That was my question.
Is that right, Mr. Buckles?
Yes, sir.
We'll make that motion, then we continue to discuss.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to approve the pool liner for the HS pool.
Second. I
That
have a
was my
question.
is, because I talked to Kevin Worley from Abington about that, and, you know, that, they've had really good success with it, and, they like it a lot.
Is there a difference in warranty on these?
I'd like to ask Mr. Buckles, what would constitute the difference between the Douglas bid and the aquatics bid?
That would be the contractor herself. I really don't know. The warranties would be the same. I think we had a spec out in Jones that required everybody to be in the same type of view. It just depends on how they look at it.
We did have specifications written by Thompson and Litton for the liner. It was published on EVA. Over 1,000 vendors received the bid. I think they said it was actually 4,000 registered with EVA that received the bid, and 3 responded.
My question was, is there a difference in the warranties on all of these liners? Because I know that was a big thing about how long this was going to last. Is there a, what is this, a 15-year or 20-year? How long is the warranty on this?
Mr. Buckles, why don't you come up here and sit with me for a minute? Make sure that you can hit this mic. My understanding as he walks up is that all 3 companies who bid had the same warranty offered with their liner. They are 10-year warranty, to my understanding, and they all bid on the same specs. I could be wrong, but Mr. Buckles is more in tune with those bids. All right, Mr. Buckles.
So the thickness of the liner was, yeah, the thickness of the liner should be 60 mil, if I'm not mistaken. That would be what was on our spec. And I would have to go back and review the warranty, but I believe it's 10 years.
Is it?
They have one in operation in Abington now.
Yes, sir. So the 3 bids then were roughly 70,000, 100,000, and 155,000. That would be correct.
So with this bid we're going with, after the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, what's the time and turnaround on it?
Well, right now we're into July. I would say September at this point.
When are we looking at reopening the pool?
Well, that would be September.
We would hope that would be in September, Mr. White.
That would be available for all of our kids on our return to school.
Yes, sir. So are they using the pool other than swim team and such, or?
Right now, it's empty.
Right.
So nobody's using it currently. King College contracts with us for their swim team to use it. It typically in the summer, it's open for swimming for the public and also for swim lessons. We also work with local swim teams. There's a lot of community use, and we also use it with our PE classes. That pool is used very, very often.
Are all 3 of these companies well-established companies?
I can't speak for the other 2. I can speak for the company that we're recommending. One of the contractors with Thompson and Litton was familiar with the company because of his work with BASA, the swim organization, and we've also worked with the Coombs Center, and they are very satisfied with this company as well. The other 2 we didn't follow up on because there was such a difference in the bid, and I probably, if the 100,000 or the 150,000 would have been the low bid, I probably could not have recommended either of those 2 to the board for consideration.
I think one of my main concerns with this, and we saw it this year, is that I think if we do this, we need to develop a long-range plan, and we need to put a 10-year thing on the pool to re-examine this liner so we don't have this happen again.
I agree completely, and that will be part of our capital improvement plan moving into the future.
Okay. Is there a maintenance criteria that's after the liner is put in as far as checks that maintenance does every year or anything like that?
The company will provide guidance for our folks to do it, but they will also offer themselves to do that work as well. We would prefer to do it in-house if we can. If it's outside of our area of expertise, obviously we would contract that out. There was another point I was going to make with Mr. White's question, but yes, we will have annual maintenance that will have to be done to the liner. Our guys would have to be trained in order to perform that maintenance.
Installation, how long does that take, Mr. Buckles? You know, once they have the liner.
Probably 2 to 3 weeks to get everything installed.
Is it a one-piece liner or is it got seams in it?
The way I understand it, it'll have seams, but they'll be welded just like it's on a roof, a flat roof.
Yeah.
And they use a heat gun, and weld those seams together.
Do they do the striping and stuff for the swim teams and the logos and all, or do we do
Yes,
that?
sir. We will actually be able to put a logo on the bottom of the swim pool, just like we have that we're currently doing on the gym floor for the basketball and volleyball teams.
So when you do the maintenance, will you be emptying the water out?
Mr. Goodpasture, that's a good question. Currently, I would say that is probably why before Mr. Buckles got here, that was not added to our to-do list for summer projects, because currently there are seams in the pool as it is, and they have wide caulk areas. But in order to replace that caulk, you do have to drain the pool, which is a 300,000 gallon ordeal. And so actually with doing the liner, we anticipate that there will be less water loss as a result of the maintenance that has to be done on the pool. But if we go back with a traditional fix and use the current structure that we have now, which does not have a liner, we would have to drain the pool to repair the caulk on an annual basis.
So what constitutes maintenance on a rubber liner or whatever that it's made of?
A big portion of it is the chemical use, keeping your pool chemicals in balance. One of the things that we'll have to work through with that, we also have an energy performance contract that requires us to use a certain set of chemicals so we don't lose heat from the pool. So we're going to have to work with both of those companies, the pool liner company and our energy performance contract folks, to make sure that the chemicals that they're asking us to use are compatible. However, we will definitely have to have training from the company to ensure that our guys have a lot of talents, but swimming pool cabana workers are not in that job description.
We purchase the chemicals from the company that we're getting the liner from.
That will have to be established. Currently, we're using chemical that has been recommended by Ms. Bull's pool maintenance guys out of Roanoke.
But some of the maintenance, you have to actually drain the pool after you have this liner in, is that?
That with the liner, that is not my understanding. With our current structure, it is. I'm sure there'll have to be some water change in it, but right now, for us to seal the seams, we have to take the water all the way out of the shallow end and partially down into the deep end.
What is the cost to fill the pool?
Yeah, what is that?
That is a lot of water, but based on the BVU rates, they do not charge us sewer for refilling, but whenever we drain, obviously we have that cost. You have the water and the sewer cost to go along.
Do you have any idea how much that is?
I don't. I can find that information out for you.
I'm trying to remember what the cost per gallon is, BBU. I don't look at that part on my bill.
as I understand it, the maintenance you're talking about with this liner, we don't have to empty the pool to do maintenance on the liner?
As far as I know, we do not have to empty the pool down to the deep end. I'm sure that there will probably be some water use as you're doing the maintenance and the backwashing and all those other kinds of things, but we do not have to empty the pool to the extent that we have to empty it every year if we're doing the proper maintenance on the existing structure.
So if we put a liner in a pool that's never had a liner, then does the curbing around become different? Is that part of it?
No, 60 mil that's a thick for a pool liner, but it's not going to make a huge difference in the length or width of the pool.
No, I mean, as far as how you attach the perimeter edge. I mean, is there some different
A coping mechanism?
Yeah. Coping or something that holds it in place, or is that what the maintenance part is?
Yeah, I am unsure. Obviously, if we go with this liner, our staff will have to be trained on how to properly, do that maintenance as far as chemicals, cleaning. I know chemicals will be a big part of it because if your chemicals get out of balance, it'll have a negative impact on the material of the liner.
So over 10 years, hopefully, then it's about $7,000 a year. We don't have any problems.
That's certainly our hope.
Anything else? Okay. Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alvis,
Yes.
Mr. Foster,
Yes.
Mr. Goodpaster,
Yes.
Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes. Stayed on long enough. Okay, next item, approval of 2020 VSBA Media Honor Roll Resolution.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve the 2020 ESBA Media Honor Roll Resolution in celebration of Mr. David McGee, Bristol Herald Courier.
I'll second that. Any discussion?
I would like to say, yeah, I've been on the board since 2008, and Mr. McGee is a mainstay. If not all of them, very, very, very high percentage of them. And when he puts a story out there, he puts it out there right, and I appreciate that.
I was going to read this. I guess I ought to read this. Yep. 2020 Virginia School Boards Association Media Honor Roll. Whereas in each community, the public schools are shaped by the community to provide the most appropriate and effective education for the school children who attend these schools. And whereas public schools are dependent on the community's support in countless ways, including support in setting goals for the education of our children, in establishing successful volunteer and booster programs at the schools, for annual funding of operations, in periodic bond elections, in the election of qualified school board members, and whereas much of the community's knowledge and opinions about the public schools rely on responsible reporting by local media representatives who decide which news to share with the community, how much attention will be focused on various issues, and what the tone of the reporting will be.
Now therefore be it resolved that the Bristol, Virginia School Board place the name of Mr. David McGee on the statewide VSBA Media Honor Roll, calling attention to the ongoing responsible and exemplary nature of reporting on this community's public schools. We express our appreciation for your balanced and accurate approach to sharing this with the community, both the challenges facing our schools and the successes achieved by the teachers and students. Your work has aided this community in focusing on the goal of providing the best public schools we can for the children who attend them.
Like that honor roll thing.
Did you notice that he's blushing? You can't see it in his cheeks, it's in his forehead.
I can read his lips. But I agree with Mr. Foster. Mr. McGee has always treated us and me very fairly, and I felt he's always accurate and truthful, and we appreciate it. We really do. And he's here almost every meeting. So he's got a good attendance record.
I would echo the same thing. During my time as chair, we had some very difficult times and some hotbed issues as well. And Mr. McGee is always fair and accurate in his reporting, and I appreciate that. Hey, congratulations.
Let's see. We had a second. So, Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alvis?
Yes.
Mr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Goodpaster?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher?
Yes. Thank you. Next up, approval of revisions to regulations GCPA R1 and GCPA R2.
Mr. Chairman, at our last school board meeting, we discussed adding furlough language to our school board policy that deals with personnel, and the board directed me to get input from our employees before we had approval of this agenda, before we considered this agenda item for approval. And so we did. In speaking to BVEA, they had recommended that we look at a Virginia Department of Education State Superintendent memo that limited the number of furlough days to 10. That was an old regulation that has been, to my knowledge, has been changed since that time. However, we did think that that was an appropriate and fair way to look at this. And so we added the language to the fullest extent permitted by law with the intent to not exceed 10 contracted days per year. So that was the change to the language versus the way that it was presented last month. Happy to answer any questions the board may have on this matter.
Can I get a motion first, and then we can discuss?
Make a motion to approve revision to regulation GCPA-R1 and GCPA-R2.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alvis?
Yes.
Mr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Goodpaster?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher?
Yes. Next up is the approval of the VSBA Code of Conduct for school board members.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the VSBA Code of Conduct for School Board Members.
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alvis?
Yes.
Mr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Goodpaster?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher?
Yes. Approval of resolution to grant school boards local flexibility in reopening schools in fall of 2020. Dr. Perry?
Mr. Chairman, as members of the board will note, we have members or superintendents from Southwest Virginia got together when the governor and the Department of Education first put out their school reopening guidance and developed a resolution that basically said Southwest Virginia looks much different than Northern Virginia and some of our larger urban areas as far as COVID transmission goes in our community. And we developed this resolution at that time, requesting that the Department of Ed and the Governor's Office and the Virginia Department of Health allow flexibility and allow us to put mitigations in place that would allow us to open in a way that made sense for our community, which at that time had 0 active cases of COVID-19. We'd only had 4 total. Dickinson County, Bland County, and some others at that point had yet to have a case of COVID-19. We began also working at the same time with the James Lane, the state superintendent, and members of his staff to get that flexibility added into what they refer to as the big book, or that's the official guidance from the governor's office on reopening school. And we've made some progress along that way, and so we held off on voting, or I held off on adding this as an agenda item in June. However, we still do not have that language in the official guidance. It is mentioned in frequently asked questions in some other places on the website. However, it is not part of the 3R, they say, the big book. However, we did receive an email from the state superintendent today that there is going to be language added to that will provide the needed flexibility for school divisions like Bristol to open as we see fit, as it makes sense in our local community, with guidance from our local health department, our school board attorney, and our risk management company. Some of that language includes reducing the amount of space that's required for social distancing to 3 foot. You know that I've been sharing that all along, that the World Health Organization has a different criteria for social distancing. The guide will now say that they recommend 6 foot distancing when you can. However, you can reduce to 3 foot if you're unable to do that. That will definitely help with our school transportation, which will be a big issue, and also in some of our smaller classrooms. I will say that this resolution caught on, and some legislators and school board members and superintendents in South Side and Central Virginia wanted to add their name to the list as well. So the original resolution that I emailed you has been changed, and they've added Southwest, South Side, and Central Virginia to the resolution. So other school boards are considering the same resolution, and my recommendation is that we approve it to go into effect on July 15th, which would enable us to continue our conversations with the Department of Ed. And if they officially add this language to the official guidance book, the resolution would be moot anyway, because there would be no need to send it on. So my recommendation is to approve this resolution effective July 15th.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the resolution to grant school boards local flexibility in reopening schools in the fall of 2020, beginning July 15th.
Second.
Any discussion?
My question is, any reason, or we have any idea why the state's not wanting to give guidance right away, knowing the school opening is right around the corner?
No, unfortunately, I think there's a lot of politics that have gone throughout the COVID-19 crisis in many areas, not just in school reopenings, but business reopenings, whether to wear a mask, whether to be self-quarantine, and so forth. And so I think the process of getting that language changed after it was originally released, just like we have a process for approving things here at our level, I think there's a similar process at the Department of Ed. And then I think the Department of Ed has to run it through the Secretary of Education. I think the Secretary of Education has to run it through other cabinet members and the governor's staff. And I think the continued pressure and the realization that, other parts of Virginia don't look like Northern Virginia. Prince William County and the city of Richmond has offered, they've gradually changed the language in their press conferences. They've just not officially added it to their official guidance, probably because of risk. I think the realization that everybody has come to now is however we open schools, we are going to assume risk. If we open schools completely remote, we will have the risk that we're sued because we don't provide a quality education for all students, especially our black and brown students, our students who live in poverty, our students who don't have access to technology, but most importantly to our special education students. However, if we open fully in person, we open up ourselves for risk as far as transmission coming from our school. The job that I have as superintendent and that our leadership team has and this board has is we are constantly in danger of being sued. And it's our job to mitigate risk as much as possible, to limit that risk as much as possible, and provide the best opportunity for our students, staff, and community that we can possibly do. However, every decision that we make, there's potential litigation to go along with it, and however we reopen schools will have the potential for litigation. What we've tried to focus on as a leadership team as we've developed our plan is to follow the guidance as much as we could, and where it made sense to implement it. However, there's no recommendation that'll be part of our plan that will go against some higher organization that has more knowledge about it than we do. For example, our plans follow the World Health Organization's recommendations. Our plan follows the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations. For the most part, our plan follows the CDC's recommendations and the BDOE's guidance. However, we're not fully in tune with that. What this new guidance that hopefully will be part of the official plan does for us is it will reduce the amount of risk because currently our risk management provider of ACOR recommends first and foremost we follow BDOE's guidance. Secondly, if we don't, they want us to document why we're not following it. And so that will take one step out of that process. By making it official guidance, we'll be in line with what our risk management folks want us to do. Long answer for a short question, I apologize.
No, you hit the nail on the head as well. So the language that we're looking for them to add at this point in time is not in their current guidance, and that's what this resolution takes place of.
They have unofficially, you heard the governor's chief of staff say that local school boards have the authority to develop their plans and they should do so based on their local health metrics. Saying that verbally and putting it in the official guidance is two different things. And what we're trying to do is just push and encourage and work with the department to make sure that that does become part of the official guidance.
I think one of the things that worries me about looking at the local statistics is Bristol's unique because we take students in from Sullivan County and we get them also in from Washington County that have much, much higher rates than we do. And that worries me that
Mr. White, I would agree with that. We do, and even from Bristol, Tennessee, and we have kids from Smith County. However, even if you look at their numbers as compared to Northern Virginia, the city of Richmond, the number of cases per 100,000 is very low. And if you look at our region and don't include Galax or Carroll County because they're experiencing something far different than we are right now, Galax actually has the highest transmission rate in the entire Commonwealth and one of the highest in the nation. However, if you look at all the other 17 school divisions, we are averaging across that entire, all 17, depending on the daily average, somewhere between 3 and 7 new cases a day. So even when you look at the outlying counties that adjoin us, the amount of transmission is still minimal.
do we have any idea how many out-of-state, out-of-city students we have coming up?
We have the list from last year. I don't know that number off the top of my head, but it is, for example, with Washington County, I think that we serve 50 of their students. I'm rounding and estimating 50, but they take 100 of ours. So we have a lot of folks that are working across lines. The biggest reason for that difference is the lack of child care in the city of Bristol, which is one of the reasons that we're using as a rationale for why we need to reopen school, because our city does not have the capacity to provide child care if we're offering school remotely.
Well, that's another question. Go ahead.
We also serve a significant population of students that they would be safer in school, COVID notwithstanding, than there would be at home.
Absolutely. My biggest fear, and one of our committees is focused just on this, one of my biggest fears is when we return to school on August 20th, if it's in person, our students will have been without us for 5 straight months. If we continue to be remote, that will be even longer. We know that a majority of the DSS cases, or at least 25%, I should say, occur when our children in our school come from the schools. Right now, many of our children do not have that advocate who's looking out for them. That's really, Mr. Goodpasture, probably my greatest fear.
Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alvis,
Yes.
Mr. Foster,
Yes.
Mr. Goodpaster,
Yes.
Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes. Next up is the discussion items, discussion of policy FFA, school names. Dr. Perigin?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, as we have seen other school divisions across our state and country consider the names of their schools, I thought it would be the right thing to do at this time to review our school name policy. I will read that to you at this point. It is the responsibility of Bristol, Virginia School Board to determine the name of schools and school facilities in the division. The board will solicit and accept input from the public regarding the names of schools and school facilities, but reserves the right to make the final decision regarding the name of any school or school facility. Suggestions regarding the name of a school or school facility must be in writing, must state the name of the person or group making the suggestion, and must state the reasons supporting the suggestion. The school board may create a committee to make recommendations to the board on the naming of any school or school facility. No school or school facility will be named for a living individual. Schools and school facilities may be named for individuals who have been deceased for at least 10 years. The board may rename a school or school facility upon a determination that it is appropriate to do so. The procedure for renaming a school or school facility will be the same as the procedure outlined above. And this policy was actually adopted the last time in this current form on April 7th of 2015, and it is in conjunction with Code of Virginia as amended section 22.1-78 and 22-1-79. Cross-references include school board committees and public dedication of new facilities.
Thank you, Dr. Perigin. Next item, presentation of first draft of school reopening plan.
Mr. Chairman, are you okay if I stay here? Would you prefer that I go to the podium to go through this presentation?
I'm okay right there.
Okay.
Sure.
All right. Ms. Jones, if you'll pull up the PowerPoint. Am I ready to go here, Mr. Shelton? Turn on button.
Mr. Chairman, I think, hold on a minute. May move too fast. Of course, I'm not opening up no can of worms. I did have a question on the last item. Are we getting any public input on wanting to change names, or is that just what everybody else is doing across the Commonwealth? Across the continental United States?
Absolutely. Yes, sir, Mr. Foster. That's a great question. I have had one phone call and one email in regards to that. Both have said that they prefer that the names stay the same. That's the only communication I've had since this information about the agenda item being discussed tonight a couple of weeks ago in the Bristol Herald Courier, WJHL, and WCYB.
Okay. Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, it's okay.
All right, so my clicker is not working. So Ms. Jones, we're going to have to see if we're synced up here. Just wanted to give you a brief overview of the current plan that our leadership team has developed and we have presented to our committees. And so in our plan development, I'll just tell you that draft 1, which is where we are now, was created by our central office leadership team, our building principals and assistant principals, and we also had 1 teacher serve on that committee. We've developed the plan in consultation with this board, the Virginia Department of Education, the Department of Health, our regional superintendents group, our rural superintendents group, our school board attorney, and VACOR. We also considered, guidance was also considered from stakeholder surveys, the CDC, the World Health Organization, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. Draft 2 is currently being created through edits, deletions, and additions that will be suggested by the committee of over 60 community stakeholders that I mentioned earlier. We intend to make this draft available for public review and public input. We'll add it to our website, we'll add it to our Facebook page, we will send it out via email, and we will also send phone calls home to families in the community to make sure that they have an opportunity to provide input. And as I said earlier, I hope to bring this back to the board on August 2nd for your approval, but we hope to get the information out to the community well before that so that families can start to make plans. We did survey our community stakeholders. We received 666 parent responses, and when you look at, that's basically half of our student bodies were represented. Those parents had some of those parents had multiple children, and that made up approximately 1,000 of our 2,100 students. We have about 400 employees. We had 243 staff responses, and we also surveyed our middle school through 11th grade students, and we had 123 student responses from that group of individuals. And so we asked each stakeholder to rank the order that they preferred how we reopen school, whether it is in-person, remote, or hybrid. And when you look at the 143 students who preferred hybrid, 61%, when you look at the number of students and ask them how they preferred to return to school, 61% of those preferred to come completely in person, 16% remote, and then another 23% preferred a hybrid model. When you look at the same demographic for our employees, employees were overwhelmingly wanting to get back in school, 73%, and 10% of those preferred fully remote, and 17% a hybrid version. When we asked the parents the same question, 57% of our parents preferred in-person completely, 17% preferred fully remote, and 26% preferred a hybrid model. Keep in mind with our parents, that represents about half the parents that we serve. The other half were unsure about where they stand on this issue. And then when you total that all together, we were about 62% of our stakeholders who took the survey preferred a fully in-person return to school. And when we asked our employees and our parents about what mitigations they wanted to see us implement, you can see that by and large, the number one response was to make sure that we regularly clean the high-touch areas of our schools. Others that ranked even very high was health screenings for staff and students and extensive cleaning, daily cleaning, following CDC guidelines. Even though there was not a lot of negative support for wearing face masks and following social distancing, those items did not receive the same level of support as good cleaning and health screenings did. So we also wanted to know what the tipping point is for those families who chose a hybrid model or a fully in-person model. And so we asked 0 active cases, a few active cases, several active cases, or widespread active cases in Bristol. As you can see, most of the parents and employees who responded to the survey believe that we should be considering widespread or several active cases before we make a decision to go fully remote. That's the tipping point. Now, what we are going to have to do is define what several and widespread are. We've been blessed beyond measure to only have had 5 cases throughout the entire crisis and only 1 active case. So our perception is much different than some other school divisions are experiencing. We also we need to know whether our employees are going to return to school, because if we don't have employees to take care of our children, we're not going to have much of an in-person school. We only have 3 of our employees who have told us that they will be unable to return to a fully in-person school day. We also asked if students return to in-person instruction, but we offer the option for remote learning. How many will take advantage of that? 33% said without a doubt their students will be in school with us. Another 33% said that they would, or 32% said they would not be in school with us, and 34% said they weren't sure yet. So, I would anticipate that we will have a group of students who are unable to attend with us in person because of the health conditions of the student or an immediate family member. And I think we'll have some families who also make a request to attend school remotely. And in those situations, we will develop some type of unofficial contract with those families to make sure that if they are not with us in person, that they're following along with their studies and staying up to date. We also, in transportation, I've said, is going to be the key. That's what is going to drive whether we can come in person or not. And as you can see here, we asked what form of transportation would you most likely use to get your child to school. 34% of the folks who responded said that they would use a school bus, and the majority of everybody else said that they would either walk to school, or they would ride with a family friend in a vehicle. So as you can see, about half of our students take advantage of our bus transportation, and you can see overwhelmingly here that about 2/3 of our families said they won't ride a bus. So I'm afraid that the people that did not respond to our survey, our majority of those are our families who typically ride a bus, and that's going to be a challenge for us to figure out. But of the 34% who said that they will be using the bus transportation typically, said that if getting back to school in person required that they provide transportation for their children, another large majority of those families said they would work with us for a short period of time to get their kids to school, whether it's both in the morning and in the afternoon or one or the other. We also had some free responses. I'll just briefly go over those. I won't read these to you, but when our parents and their free responses, obviously I had 25 pages of responses after we combined them into one document. These are the common themes that we saw. Whatever decision we make, parents want us to put safety first. For the folks who wanted in-person instruction, they were very passionate about it. And for the families who wanted to have remote instruction, it was typically because of a health issue of their child or a close family member. We heard over and over that virtual learning was a challenge, and that many students felt like that they were falling behind. There was also concerns about a second wave. They want to make sure that we implement mitigations, but we don't push them. In other words, if a child takes their mask off, they don't want their child to be punished for that, but they do want their child to be encouraged to wear it. And students, I will say that students with special needs especially seem to struggle during this time. And then when we ask the same questions to our staff, you'll see that many of those responses around safety were important. Some of our staff members had concerns about childcare if we implemented a hybrid model, and many of our employees, as you would probably expect, want to see the details of the plan, and many of our employees are now seeing the details of their plan as well, and we're getting pretty good feedback so far from our staff members. So again, our staff also had concerns about how they were being able to reach students with special needs while we were doing it remotely. So finally, I'll end with the rationale for the direction that we have taken with our first draft. And first of all, as I've mentioned already, we do have a low transmission rate in Bristol. The CDC, even though it's not officially mentioned in the BOE's guidance, they do have guidance for low transmission areas, and that's part of the guidance that we're following. If you don't know who Dr. Fauci are, that means you're watching too much Netflix and not enough local news. But Dr. Fauci, in a conversation with Morgan Griffith, actually in a committee meeting, said that return to school plans should be based on local health metrics. The governor and the Department of Ed are now supporting local decision making in regards to reopening schools. Unofficially, we're pushing to make that official. The American Academy of Pediatrics suggests that children and adolescents have been placed at higher risk of morbidity and mortality from physical or sexual abuse, substance abuse, anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation since schools have closed. And they recommend, as soon as you can do it in a healthy and safe way, that students need to have a full return to school. Research indicates that there is a tremendous amount of lost learning as a result of COVID-19. You've heard of the summer slide. I call it the COVID crash. Survey results from our stakeholders show that there is a preference for an in-person return. And then we also, I will note that we do have plans to work with concerned families and to return to a remote or a hybrid model if our conditions worsen. So just because we're recommending that we return fully in person to school doesn't mean that we're going to alienate our families who are not comfortable doing so, or that we're going to be so stubborn or steadfast that if we do see a spread in our community that we will not go to a hybrid or a remote model. And so that's a very quick summary of what has turned into about a 50-page document at this time. I'd be happy to answer any questions about where we are in the planning process if that's the board's desire.
I see that I applaud the work that we've done. I think it's absolutely amazing. One of the concerns that I have with this is, are we consulting any of the colleges and universities in regard to our plan? Are they in favor of this? Are we leaving them out of it completely, since they will be checking this? And also, will they accept, our virtual credits? Do we know that?
We do. The Virginia Highlands Community College and the Virginia Community College system are accepting high school credits that were done remotely, and they actually had a different criteria in the spring for the dual enrollment credits that they were offering than the Department of Ed put out for normal high school students.
That's great with community colleges, but I'm talking about UVA, Virginia Tech, some of the other schools, George Mason, William and Mary.
Yeah, I've not had personal conversations with them as well, but whatever decision they make about Bristol students, they'll be making for students across the Commonwealth. Our plan is probably much different in the fact that we hope to offer more in-person instruction than a lot of areas do. So if anything, we're positioning our students better than some school divisions who will be completely remote.
I think that my main concern is that historically, the students from Bristol, Virginia, they've gone to some of the top colleges in the country. I mean, when I was at Virginia High, I had 2 Rhodes Scholars. I had Fulbright Scholars, and they went to, what? What's the matter? Oh, yeah. Here's one of them. One of my Fulbrights right here. But they go to these top schools, and I want to know, I want to make sure that they're being approved for more than just community college.
Well, Mr. White, only one state in the country has not closed schools. So every senior that graduated this year graduated in some type of remote or hybrid model. And our school reopening plan going into the fall is probably a better instructional model for student learning than any remote model that'll be offered. So if anything, this plan positions our students to have an advantage.
So can we get feedback from these other institutions?
We can certainly ask the Department of Ed, but I don't know that all those institutions are going to specifically answer a question from Bristol, but I will ask the Department of Education if they can get guidance for us in that.
But I would think they would be scrambling too, just as much as we are, because they have to take these kids from all over the Commonwealth and all over the nation. But that's a big concern.
We do have one serving on the instruction committee.
Excuse me?
We do have one from higher ed serving on the instruction committee.
Higher ed, and where's the higher ed? Emory Henry. Okay.
So that meeting of reopening school that I attended last week was my first encounter with the school board. I wasn't on it yet. I hadn't been sworn in, but I was terribly impressed with the extent of study that had been done and the widespread input from all over the division. And it's a very thorough, well thought out plan. And I'm impressed that other school divisions are using it as a template to open their own divisions. And I congratulate everybody that's been involved in that. And I was very encouraged by the high quality of teamwork and the high quality of thought and consideration that went into it.
I wouldn't trade our team for anybody. I say that to them all the time, and I know they think I'm blowing smoke, but I've been ran out of a lot of places, and I've not found a better leadership team than what we have here.
I guess, in the end, it all comes down to money. So remote learning and hybrid models, do we get full credit for our students in Bristol, Virginia for that? If they're enrolled in our program?
Yes, that is one thing that I think could be. It could either be a terrible problem or an excellent advantage. Is we have a number of families in Bristol in every community that participate in homeschool. They pay for that instruction. However, we are now going to be able to provide a remote instruction to families free of charge. So what I hope happens is that we do have some of our homeschool students take advantage of the remote offerings that we're now going to have available. Yeah, that is Mr. Albert. I've got 3 concerns about funding for the fall. Number 1 is that we have a decrease in enrollment, which will have that's basically how we're funded. Number 2, that state sales tax numbers go down more than we've anticipated. And number 3, that lottery proceeds go down, lottery revenues go down more than we've anticipated. So far, it looks like that our estimate is holding true, and actually we've estimated too low. I'll just keep my fingers crossed and knees bent that trend continues.
My concerns are the educators. I mean, we more or less got thrown into this. It wasn't our fault, but toward March, we were almost through anyway. But that's going to put added pressure on our educators either way, whether it's remote or whether we're back in class, because you mentioned we may lose some people that cannot come back or don't wish to come back. And of course, I don't want to lose anybody. But what it comes down to is the fact that, are our educators prepared to accept another challenge? Because I understand that it's going to be harder for them if we go back remotely, because even though they got through it this spring, if we go back through it this fall and happen to have another setback, then I don't think there's going to be any forgiving on that. And I know that we didn't have that problem here in Bristol. We got through it, and none of the teachers were, put to the task of, well, how come we didn't teach this or didn't teach that? I just want to make sure that, ever how we start, that, our educators are well aware and understand that, hey, I'm going to have to do A, B, C in order to get D, C, and E in. Because another issue that I have, and I'd be afraid to ask, even though we've got great teachers and we've got great parents, there's probably still some of our kids that have fallen through the cracks from the spring. And I'd be interested in finding out how many of those were not able to actually learn virtually or understand to learn virtually, or whatever the problem would be. And I hate to see that happen again.
Mr. Foster, that's a great point, great question. One of the survey questions that we asked was about engagement during the virtual process in the spring. I didn't share that tonight because that's not information about our plan for next year. That's information for about how we're going to go back and readjust. But many of our families say that their students were not engaged or engaged very little. And I mentioned the COVID crash. That's going to be part of that as well. So we have identified students in our elementary schools that we know that could potentially fall into that category. We're trying to get them into summer school now so that we can deal with some of those issues. But that's the student that I think is going to be very important for us to get back into school in person, because as you know, if a student's not reading on grade level by grade 3, their chances for success later on down the road are greatly impacted. And so we've got to get those kids into school so that we can, there was some learning that occurred in the spring, but the real magic happens in a classroom when teachers are building that relationship and they see that reaction, the head nod, or the nose curl, or hear the audible, that's when teachers know that learning's happening. And it's almost impossible to replicate that in an online format. Some of the things that we are thinking about, though, we will, the plan as it is now, we will be in school in person 4 days a week, and we will offer remote learning 1 day a week, except for the families who need child care that other day, and we will work with community agencies and our non-instructional staff to provide child care for those families. Because our teachers are going to be working harder than they ever had. They're going to be teaching in person. They're going to be teaching online. And if we don't give them a day to take a breath and plan and refocus and use the assessment for learning strategies to go back and replan their instruction for the next week, we're going to have teacher burnout like no other. Secondly, one of the things our leadership team talked about today, depending on after we find out exactly how many students are going to be remote, there are going to be some situations where if the 5 of you are second grade teachers, we may be able to pull Mr. Foster off to the side and say, you're taking all the remote kids. And that way the other 4 teachers can just focus on providing instruction for the children who are coming in person. Now, we can't make that plan until we know exactly who's coming and who's not, but that's one of the things that we're looking at to try to reduce the amount of stress that teachers are going to have by providing in-person and remote instruction. The other thing is, we can plan all this, Mr. Fletcher mentioned this earlier, and all of a sudden, on August 17th, we have 25 cases. August 18th, we have 25 more, and on August 19th, we have 70 cases here in Bristol. Well, now we've got to rethink what we're doing on August 20th. And so one of the things that we're working with our teachers to do is they are going to have the first 9 weeks of instruction prepared on day 1 to go completely remote in case we need that. So we're thinking about every scenario, going in person, coming back out hybrid, going in fully remote, there's going to be a lot of changes. But the good thing about our plan is it's very multifaceted. And even though we may or may not get back August 20th fully in person, at some point in the future we will, and our plan is going to be developed and ready to move forward.
Well, I'm not a teacher and I don't profess to be, but that was a concern of mine. I just didn't want them to be short-sighted or put it at a disadvantage one way or the other.
That's one of the things
Great work by the committee.
That's one of the things that I've noticed with this plan is our teachers. I cannot believe everything that is expected of our teachers. No, we're not talking about big financial addition things to come on here. We're not talking about time off. We're not talking about anything. But what we're expecting teachers to do in the next year is absolutely mind-boggling. I thank God I'm not teaching anymore, because I don't know that I could do my in-class thing, do a remote thing, check up on the attendance, check to see who's turning things in, get in touch with the parents, get in touch with this person. It's a phenomenal amount of work we're putting on the teachers.
Agreed.
Well,
So now the committees, and you are probably receiving invitations to serve on committee, or not to serve, but to participate in the committee meetings. If you can come in person, come on. If you want to join virtually, join virtually. But we want your input as well, because you're going to hear the feedback after the plan is implemented. So if you can attend, do so. We'll be making changes to each of the department categories as they've been presented. And then hopefully by July 15th, we'll be ready. We'll have the second draft, even though at that point we'll have to send it to the editor to get all the fonts the same, the headings the same, and that kind of thing. But we will very shortly thereafter have a very professional document that we can post online for the public. And then by August 2nd, you will have received the input via email and potentially surveys before you take a final vote on August 2nd.
I know, I'm sorry, I'm just asking so many questions. I know you said something about August 20th.
Yes, sir.
Of course, everybody knows I'm a Labor Day guy, but you know, I understand what's going on here with the, if we're able to start August 20th, which I hope probably we will. I don't want to say anything, but anyway, if we do, or you know, is there any plan looking at how we would redo this if we didn't start until after Labor Day, how that would look like?
Yes, sir. We are going to be ready on August 20th to start either fully remote or fully in person, with families being able to choose to go remote if we are in person. So we're going to be ready either way. What has also gone into our planning process, if there are models out there that say that Southwest Virginia has not seen the first wave yet, and that we could see the first wave in mid-September. And so our thought is, if we've not seen the first wave yet, and our numbers are still good, we've got to get in school. I think Mr. Alvis made this point in our last meeting. It was not as hard to go remote last year because we'd already built the relationships with our students. Everybody knew what the expectations were from the teachers. But if we have to start fully remote this year, we're going to be doing it with 170 kindergartners who have never laid eyes on their teacher before. We're going to be doing it with, well, basically every student who may not have ever sat in a classroom with a teacher that they're going to have next year. And so if we can get in person at the beginning of the school year on August 20th, we need to do everything that we can in a safe and healthy way to do so, because there's a great potential that we'll either see a first wave or a second wave come through that causes us to have to back up. And our backup plan is going to be ready at the same time that our number one plan will be ready. And our backup to the backup, and our backup to the backup to the backup.
And I hate to say these three letters, but so is the Department of Education, are they going to relax any of the SOL requirements and such?
So Dr. Lane has said that if we start anyway rather than in person, he will petition with the feds to relax that. The state can take away SOL testing, but they can't take away accreditation. And so unless the feds give us a waiver like they did last spring, there would be some tests that we would have to administer. So at that point, we'll have to get some advocacy going at the federal level, because right now the U.S. Department of Education is saying there'll be no waivers.
So also, just to piggyback on that, because we have so many hours we have to have during the day and time, are they going to also waive that if we don't start on time in order to get there?
Yes, absolutely. As you know, they're recommending that some communities start fully remote or in a hybrid model, and so accommodations are going to have to be made for the 990 clock hour rule that we have for schooling, which is one of the reasons that we'll talk about a little bit later, that we're able to make the recommendation for school start times that we'll be recommending later.
So they don't have like one SOL for the remote learning and a different one for the in-class thing? Because that's impossible. You cannot possibly get the same amount of education remote learning that you can in classroom learning.
And I think BDOE recognizes that. However, I'm not sure US DOE does.
I think that's why your poll showed overwhelmingly the employees wanted to return back to school. Felt like because they know, they understand what happened this spring and their engagement or lack of engagement and how important it is to be back in the classroom. I forget what your poll was, but I think it was almost 80%.
Yes, for our staff it was 75 or something. One other thing that I would like to, Ms. Jones, if you'll pull up the other document on that discussion item, there are going to be costs associated with this, and as we're developing the plan, we're also developing a list of additional costs. As we develop the plan, and as we close out last year, we'll have a better idea of how much of this plan we can afford. but there are going to be some great expenses to providing daily health screenings, temperature checks, additional bus runs, overtime for cleaning, overtime for bus drivers. I won't read that whole list to you, but obviously you can tell that there's going to be some added costs. We will have some remaining CARES Act funding, and there are some additional gear funding that we'll be applying for grants for to try to offset the cost. The good news is we have April's state sales tax numbers, which they were much better than we anticipated. We have those lottery numbers. They were much better than anticipated. Ms. Jones, I don't think you have received May's as of today, have you? We're waiting on May's to come in at any time, and so we're hoping that that's going to be more good news so that we have some CARES Act funding left available as much as we can to make sure that we can offset the cost of these additional items that will be part of implementing our plan next year. So I wish that we were ready to share our document. I think Mr. White and Mr. Goodpasture and you guys have had a copy of it too. It's a really good document. It's very thorough. It's covering all the bases. And unfortunately, with those 50 pages that it encompasses, there's going to be a lot of additional cost. And so, we have a backup plan to the backup plan for revenues going down too. And the last option we would use would be to have an impact on employees. But there may be a time if our state sales tax goes down, our lottery revenues go down, and we have a decline in enrollment, that we may have to talk to the city about some of the CARES Act funding that they have set aside that could go towards remote learning options as well. I've made that request initially, and I know they're still in the planning process, but that may be something that's in our future unless the trends for state sales tax and lottery revenues continue to follow the path they're on.
This is a tad off the subject, but have we figured money for a school resource officer?
Mr. Goodpasture, that's a good question. Thankfully, in the city of Bristol, that falls on the city side of the budget. Our local police department makes that available, and we don't have a contribution to that. The state used to pick up a part of that funding. However, that grant ran out, and so now the city of Bristol is fully funding school resource officers. And Mr. Osborne and Mayor Hartley, I think you're here. Thank you very much for the support in that endeavor. It means a lot to the safety of our children.
Okay. Anything else? Next is discussion of policy JC, school attendance areas, potential rezoning.
Ms. Jones, if you'll start with the policy. I just want to be sure that we review this policy as well. School attendance areas for each school are established by the school board. Students attend the school in the attendance area in which they reside and to which they are assigned unless special permission is granted by the school board. And our school board actually grants that authority to the superintendent for final approval. Changes in attendance areas are determined by the school board upon recommendation of the superintendent based on the need to provide for the orderly administration of the schools, the competent instruction of the students, and the health, safety, best interests, and general welfare of all students. As I know you are very well aware that part of our consolidation plans, part of the issues that we've had is that we have overcrowded classrooms at Stonewall Jackson and at Van Pelt Elementary. We have room for more capacity at Washington Lee Elementary and at Highland View Elementary. And based on the social distancing requirements that we're currently faced to implement, those overcrowded classrooms of 24 children in a kindergarten class at one school and 13 or 14 kindergarten students in a class at another school certainly makes social distancing a challenge. We have avoided doing a rezoning. I think before I got here, this board went through several rezones over a 4 or 5 year period. I've been here 3.5, almost 4 years now, and we've not had a rezoning. We've avoided that because we've been so close to consolidating our elementary schools and building a new one that we've been able to avoid the uncomfortable act of rezoning schools. However, if we want to be able to provide a socially distanced environment at all of our elementary schools, we may need to consider this rezoning. And so, Ms. Jones, now if you'll pull up the PowerPoint, I'll give you some brief information about what I anticipate that would look like if you decide to approve it. Now keep in mind, what I'm looking for tonight is just a blessing to go ahead and study this and to gain community input. We would not obviously approve this tonight, but we may have to approve it at our August school board meeting. And what I want to know from the board tonight is, should we consider it, should we drop it, or should we start getting input from the communities that this would affect? And so I'll start out with Stonewall Jackson, their attendance zone. As you can see from this map, it crosses over Commonwealth Avenue and goes to Piedmont below Euclid Avenue, but above Euclid Avenue, it stays on the Commonwealth side. Those students actually live a little closer to Washington Lee Elementary than they do to Stonewall Jackson. And we could move 36 students from the Stonewall Jackson attendance zone to the Washington Lee attendance zone and free up some much needed space by moving that line to what is much a straighter and more a normal line, I should say, following Commonwealth Avenue. But that obviously has an impact on families and students. I'll tell the board in your executive content on board docs, we provided the information about these students with IEPs or special needs students, how that would impact them. Because the number was so low, we didn't want to make that public because it would be identifiable information. But in your executive content, you have the impact this would have on special ed students. And so if you go on to the next slide, you will see that if you look at the way that this would affect the racial makeup of our schools, the impact would be that this would be one black student that would be moved, 31 Caucasian students, and 3 students who are multiple races, and 1 student who identifies as other. You look at the male-female breakup, that 55% of those students would be male, 44% would be female. And then if you look at the grade level distribution, you'll see that -1 is a pre-K student who would be going into kindergarten next year. 0 is a kindergarten student from last year that would be a first grader next year. And that, moving on to the end, that would be 4th grade students last year who would be rising 5th grade students. As you can see, there are 12 of those students and between 4 and 6 of the other grade level students. But how does that impact Washington Lee with their enrollment? What that would change is our total enrollment for kindergarten would be at 22, so that we would still be in good shape there. It does provide one problem in 1st grade where we would potentially have to hire another teacher there because we would be over the class size limit. But in all the other grade levels, it would even out the distribution of students to make sure that we were not overcrowded at one school and we're under capacity at another. So moving on to, that would be the only boundary adjustment I would recommend for those 2 school areas would be to move the line on the south side of Euclid from Piedmont to Commonwealth. Then if you look at the border line between Van Pelt and Highland View, if you just take in the students who live in East Ridge Apartments, that would be 28 students in those grade levels. As you know, Woodlands, or some of you may refer to it as Springdale, and East Ridge are both closer to Highland View Elementary. However, the students in the neighborhoods close to Highland View actually go to Van Pelt. And we have a lot of overcrowding issues in the classrooms at Van Pelt. We have capacity to take more students at Highland View. And by just taking students from East Ridge and moving them to Highland View, that would be 28 students. Again, I will refer you to the special ed numbers in your executive content. But in speaking to Ms. Denabraga, this actually would alleviate some issues. Highland View's special education teacher is a little over his class roster limits, and we do have some students at Van Pelt, or some special ed teachers at Van Pelt who are a little under their roster limits. And so by moving the students with special needs from this neighborhood and the other neighborhood surrounding it to Highland View, it would cause us to take a half of a special ed position from Van Pelt and move it to Highland View, and provide needed support for the special ed teacher and the students with IEPs at Highland View. So it would be a benefit from that standpoint. If you look at the ethnicity of the students this would affect, there would be 12 black students who would be affected by this move, 12 Caucasian students, and then 4 students who identify with multiple races. It's exactly a 50-50 split on the gender of those students. Then, if you look at it by grade level, again, -1 are students who will be kindergartners next year, and 4 are the students that will be 5th graders the following year. And I will get to the summary of that when I get down to the end of the slide. So then, if you look at the next slide, let's say that you leave Eastridge, the residents of Eastridge attending Van Pelt, and only take the students who are beyond Eastridge and move them to Highland View. That's the Harbor Landing apartment complex, Dixie Street, and I'm moving all the way over to William Street. You know, we currently have students who live on William Street who are zoned to go to Van Pelt. William Street is right on the Tennessee state line border. And that would encompass 15 students. And if you look at the ethnicity of those students, 3 of those students are black, 8 of those students are Caucasian, and 4 of those students identify with multiple races. You also have that special ed data in your executive content as well. Really a large male, 73% of those students are males, and a large portion of those students actually would be going into kindergarten next year. But when you look at it as the impact that it would have on Highland View, you can see that we have both scenarios listed there, but even if you take all 42 of those students and move them to Highland View, you really only create one class, one grade level that has 20 students in each class, and that would be the first grade group at 41. And also 5th grade at 42, but we don't have the same class size restrictions for 4th and 5th graders. So as you can see, by moving those 42 students, you still create an environment in Highland View that is below the requirements that we have for class size reduction funding. Obviously, it's very easy for me to talk about statistics as we talk about rezoning. What I will tell you is that I know, not as well as you do, members of the board who've been through this process, this has a tremendous impact on families. And so I think we need to approach this with that in mind and with great caution. However, as we develop a plan for reopening school, this does provide some additional opportunities for us to level class sizes across the division, but also to create opportunities for easier social distancing. So, Mr. Chairman, that is all that I have in form of presentation. I hope we'll have some discussion and at least maybe gain some consensus about this, whether or not this is a path that you'd like for our leadership team to continue to follow.
Thank you, Dr. Parrish.
There are 2 compelling reasons to do that from what I've heard. First, we have to open school. We have to have the social distancing guidelines, meet them the best we can, and moving students across zone makes sense. Also, in both cases, you're moving people into a school where they're closer logistically than they were before. So from that standpoint, it's a shorter bus ride, and I think that makes sense. So both the logistics and the compelling reason on social distancing, I'm all in favor of you moving with your best judgment.
Well, I got to say, this was absolutely, when we rezoned, the worst, the most controversial thing in my 26 years of being on the school board that we ever went through. None of the rest of you were on when we did it for you. It was a horror story, absolute. And we had to go back to what we were doing before because there's so much controversy over it. If we're looking at square footage, Van Pelt, the pods in there are 5,000 square feet, but the rooms at Highland View are 600. So if we're talking about where we can put in more kids right now, as we're going through all of this, I really can't see moving them. And also, if we move kids from Harbor's Landing and Eastridge into Highland View, I think we're creating probably one of the, as far as racial and socioeconomic groups go, I think we are creating an absolute, it's terrible to me. We will have that one school that will have the most fractured population in Bristol, Virginia. So that's basically where I'm going with that thing right now. But I do not want to go through. Maybe you do. I do not want to go through.
Mr. White, I
don't want to go through another one of those, and I'm not going to go through it. Y'all can decide it if you want to. I'm not going through that again.
Mr. White, I would also say, going back to that, your argument is that was also one of the reasons that we thought it was great. It was a good reason to consolidate schools, because then you did not have ethnicity disproportionality between schools, and that is a great point. Van Pelt already has a lower proportion of students of other races other than Caucasian than our other schools, and Highland View has an increased amount, and so you would create an environment where you did have less diversity at Van Pelt and more diversity at Highland View.
I agree with Mr. White on this one. I mean, you know, that's probably the hardest thing I've done, except for the one time when we had to cut budget. But redistricting, it's almost like the R word now. But it was hard. But I guess my question with this now is this totally because of the COVID and the social distancing that we're looking at this? Or is it something we're just trying to balance it off? And I know it would have made a difference if we could have went ahead with the two-school model. That would have solved all problems, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen for a while anyway. So,
Mr. Foster, I think there's probably three answers to that question. Number one, yes. This is the reason I'm bringing it up now. The timing of this is because of COVID and social distancing. Absolutely, positively. However, I think that this board has recognized that we have inequity for our teachers, because if you're a teacher at Van Pelt with 24 kindergartners and you're a teacher at Highland View with 13 kindergartners and you're on the same pay step, you are paid the same amount of money at one school even though you may not have as many students to serve as the other. So I think from an equity standpoint for teaching staff and trying to get class sizes level across the division, that is the bigger reason that we've talked about it in the past but avoided it because we thought consolidation was right around the corner. But timing-wise, yes, you're absolutely right. It would be for COVID-19 return to school planning.
And the change from 6 foot to 3 foot doesn't really make any difference at all to redistricting.
Well, yes, absolutely. But keep in mind, our plan as it is I think we were already recommending potentially going down to 3 foot anyway, following the World Health Organizations. But we're going to have some classrooms. But Mr. White, I'm going to ask Mr. Buckles. I'm not so sure that our square footage at Highland View is 600 square feet.
He's the one who told me that.
Is that right, Mr. Buckles? Because the smallest classrooms we've found across the division have been 650 square feet, and those classes will hold 18 students. But as you said, in our pods that are 5,000 square feet, and when you divide those with the barriers that we have currently, and then you have the common areas, those classroom spaces, for example, when we turn the quad into, when we turn the fourth grade, what's now the fifth grade, we're less than 800 square feet whenever you divide those rooms with walls. So there's not a big difference in the amount of space, even though those pods are bigger. Again, I'm not saying this is a perfect solution, but as superintendent of schools, it's my job to make recommendations for what makes sense across the division. And again, I will do what the board directs me to do, but I couldn't go without making this recommendation.
Well, I understand what you're saying, and when I look at Van Pelt and I look at some of the renovations that have been done, I know there's a lot of wasted space in the back of those pods, the way it's been redone, those hallways going out there, that in the pods that have not been redone, we don't have it. I also understood that we were getting rid of a lot of that storage stuff all over the place, right? So that can be divided many different ways, because we're not going to have to worry about all that big shelving that's going out through there. So whereas now we might have 4 classes, you could possibly divide that up into 5 or 6 classes.
So that is, we have rented some storage space to take the unnecessary furniture out. I don't know how much that has been identified as Van Pelt as being unnecessary. I would say not as much, because those are used as dividers to keep students from seeing what's going on in the classroom that is right beside them. And so I'm guessing that we're not going to move a lot of furniture from Van Pelt, because that furniture would be deemed necessary as a divider between classrooms.
I think so in regular times that there's a lot to be said for that, but I think in these times when we're looking at COVID virus and we're trying to come up with solutions and something creative, if we're getting rid of I think a lot of that can be gotten rid of from what I've seen up there, because we have, God knows you need space. I always needed it when I was teaching school too, but I think given the times right now and what's going on, that our main consideration is getting the most number of kids in the square footage that we have. And I think we have more square footage at Van Pelt than we do Highland View. We're not taking into consideration the hallways, for example, at Highland View. In the square footage, you don't have to take them in at Van Pelt because you don't have a hallway in the pod, right?
Hallways at Van Pelt?
In the pod.
Right, but we don't have hallways in the classrooms at Highland View either.
You have like 3 or 4 classrooms, and then you have a hallway in between them that you're not teaching in, correct?
Right, but we have hallway space in both of the square footages at both of those schools.
Yeah, but I think you can make a lot of accommodations at Van Pelt where we don't have walls that you cannot make at Highland View or any of our other schools where we do have walls.
How much do you think, how accurate is this enrollment versus the actual this fall?
Great question. We are a very highly mobile school division, and many of our students unfortunately face homelessness as part of their normal day-to-day activities. And so we may have more students in those classes at Stonewall Jackson and Van Pelt to begin the year, and then it reduces for 3 days, and it picks back up for 2 weeks. I will tell you that typically, since I've been here in 3.5 years, our class sizes have remained very, very small at Highland View and Washington Lee. Now, this kindergarten class all across the division this past year was a very large class. We were brimming over the top in almost every school in kindergarten last year. However, otherwise, consistently at Highland View and Washington Lee, our numbers have remained well below what we can accommodate there. And at Stonewall Jackson and Van Pelt, in particular grades, not in every grade, but in particular grades, we have been kind of busting at the seams.
Well,
and again, those numbers change, but that has been the trend over the last 3.5 years. And I can assure you, every time I walk into one of those classrooms at Van Pelt or at Stonewall Jackson that is above capacity, above those numbers, I am reminded by those teachers that there is that inequity across the division.
Well, my other concern is Highland View. The state has even recommended that we close it, and it just seems to me putting more students in there it's just going against what should be doing.
I agree. I think that's a great point, that by far Highland View the facility is in the worst condition of any building that we have. I think it's very clear, my opinion is we should have 0 students in that building. I've been working with this board towards that end from the very beginning. And so you have a very valid point. To put more students in there goes against the grain of that. However, as I said before, the reason for this recommendation is not based upon the quality of the building. It's the criteria that we're going to have to meet if we're going to have a full in-person return to school.
Sure.
But that's a great point. Excellent point.
Well, I'm not afraid to make tough decisions, and I understand that this is going to come across with, doing a little bit of evening out when it comes to teaching in the classroom, but we better make sure, and I'll support teachers all day long, every day, but we've got to make sure that what we're doing is going to benefit these families that we're uprooting and moving them from one school to another one. Because I don't want them to be left out, because don't want to lose anybody or have them fall through the cracks just because of a move. And some of the people we serve, Mr. Goodpasture said it earlier, that's where they thrive at, is at school. And I don't want to start moving just to be moving. So that's my only concern with that. And like I said, that redistricting was tough. I understand we got to do it because of this COVID, but still yet, let's make sure that we're doing it the right way as well.
Absolutely, and I agree, and I've heard the horror stories that y'all have shared about redistricting and rezoning, and certainly would not have brought this recommendation to you had I not thought it was in the best interest of our school division. One other thing that I'll throw out in fairness that actually goes against my argument is we have no idea how many of these families will take advantage of remote learning and how many will return in person. And so by default, we could have additional room in those classrooms because students take advantage of remote learning, and so you may not have 24 kids in that class. So even though that goes against the grain of my recommendation, I think that's something that we just don't know.
The children that we're looking at, I forgot to ask that, are they siblings or are they just out of one household?
Some of the students that we're looking at are siblings, some are singles or only children. There's a mix. But that total number represents every child.
Plus, I would hate to do that for 1 year, and then we have to revert back to where we were after a year.
My recommendation is if we make the change that we not revert back, we provide as much consistency as possible. And I will also lay the groundwork here is as soon as our economy is ready to handle it, and depending on how the referendum goes in November, I think there's a time in the very near future that we need to revisit building a new facility to make sure that we do have equity across the division for all of our elementary students as far as school facilities go at the elementary level.
While the numbers make sense, but when you look at the community in itself and loading, the most struggling of our community into Highland View, I don't know that I can do East Ridge and the East Ridge district and the surrounding. I might can support one of those, but I don't know that I could do both. I just don't think it's. I just think it would do more harm than good, in my opinion. The numbers. If you just go by numbers and take your emotions and everything else out of it, the numbers look good. But we need to look at our students and our families and how they're going to be best served in the schools as well. You take 40-some kids that haven't been in school since March, and they're in a new building, a new school, and I've got one at home that's right wild as well. I just can't. You filling a building up with some rowdies. I've got one myself. But that's kind of where that's kind of how I feel about it. I could support one, but I don't think I could do both of those.
Mr. Alvis, another great point. That's one of the reasons I like working for this board is we may not always agree, and maybe I do agree with you, but I think it's great for us to have discussion about these tough and important issues. But one of the things that we are considering as part of our return to school plan is starting kindergartners a couple days late and allowing students to begin the year for a couple of days only with their teacher from last year, so that those classrooms, teachers, and students can get some closure that they really never got an opportunity to have. That's just, we've not made that official, but that is one thing that we're considering. And so one of my biggest concerns about rezoning would be that, you know, the social emotional impact that's going to have on those students who are already displaced from school from last year and then put them in an entire new building. So I certainly get that. An alternative that we could consider, because it doesn't seem like there's consensus of the board to move forward with an official redistricting plan, but I'm happy, I mean, I may just be reading the wrong thing into it, is we could contact those families and make it available for them to attend the school that's closer to their, and we could also potentially bring Woodlands or Springdale into that conversation as well, and allow families to make a choice one way or the other. That could be another potential solution. However, again, I'm not so sure that will get us to where we're trying to get with this recommendation anyway. But it's something we could consider.
Mr. Perigin, can you open the school safely, and I mean our whole system, without implementing the plan you suggested?
If every student who we think is going to come back comes back, we could not return fully in person if all families took advantage of the in-person instruction that we're going to offer, because we could not get the 6 feet social distancing. We would have to reduce and mitigate and put shields in on desks. We'd have to require students to wear masks. So we could make it work, but we would have to have additional mitigations if every student returned. To answer that question, if some students return in person and some return remotely, I don't know, because we don't know which of those students plan to come back or not. But we are going to, regardless of how we return, we're going to mitigate in a way that makes it as safe as we can possibly make it. This plan makes that easier to do in a safe and healthy way. It doesn't make it impossible to do it as we are currently standing.
So do we need all 42 to do that? I mean, if you left East Ridge where it's at, that's 28, so that gives you 15 of the other community. Would that suffice, I guess?
That would help for sure. It would. I mean, there's a happy, and here's the other thing too is, depending on what grade level they're in, it may, like I showed with the Washington Lee, it actually hurts Washington Lee's first grade, and we would potentially have to consider hiring another teacher in that scenario. So this plan is not perfection. It does not make everything beautiful and rainbows everywhere. That's not what this plan does. It just makes it easier to implement the current restrictions that we have. Again, we will make it work in a safe way regardless. This recommendation makes it easier to do and tackles another issue that we've avoided because we thought consolidation was right around the corner.
So with this discussion, you're just asking for permission to go forward and explore it?
Yeah. Tonight, what I would anticipate happening, if y'all said, I want to move forward with this, what we would do is set up a community meeting for the families that would be involved, one for the Van Pelt Highland View area, one for the Stonewall Jackson Washington Lee area, and receive input from those families. They may think that it's better because Highland View is so much closer to them than Van Pelt is. They may say, absolutely not, we love going to Van Pelt, it's the best thing ever. And so you would at least have that input before you made the decision. However, at the same point in time, if the board does not think that they would vote to approve this recommendation, there's no sense in us putting time into that endeavor and effort. I would rather spend the next month developing a plan that works for the boundary lines that we currently have, rather than going through a process that may not get approval at the end of the day anyway.
Well, it looks to me, being the newest member on this board, that the real sticking point is Highland View and Van Pelt. Because moving those people from Commonwealth Avenue back toward Washington Lee, that makes excellent sense to me. But I can understand where Mr. White's coming from. But at the same time, we're dealing with a pandemic that nobody even, we don't know anything about this virus that we can really take to the bank, because we're making it up as we go along. But in this case, we've got to do something to open up our schools, and that's the paramount objective, I think.
Well, I agree. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts, and I mean, is possibility of moving some teachers. I mean, teaching a couple classes, one school, and going to another school and teaching. I mean,
That's a little easier to do at middle and high school than it is at elementary school. And one of the other things with our plan this year, we are going to try to reduce transitions as much as possible. So fifth graders who may normally switch classes may not switch classes next year simply because of the health reasons associated with it. And so that's a great idea to consider normally, but probably under our current circumstances, it may not be such a good idea. You know, I don't see that the board is, yeah, absolutely, this is the right thing to do, we've got to do it, let's move forward. I think at the best, we would have a split vote if we got to August with the recommendation, regardless of how the input come in. Our division may be better served if we offer families in those areas the opportunity to attend the other school to help with that voluntarily, but not require it, not do a boundary shift, rather than it would be, because there'll be a lot of work that would have to go into making this happen, and we have plenty on our plate already. And so if the board does not see a clear path to potentially get this approved, I would prefer, rather than put that additional work on our staff, to attack it a different way and try to make the best out of the situation that we currently have. That would be my recommendation based on the responses I've heard from the board tonight.
What about our out of zone students that cross zones to go to different schools? I mean, if we didn't approve those, would that help in this situation?
That will help in some particular situations. What I don't want to do is to take away, if we've given that permission already, I don't want to take it away arbitrarily. However, we are going to develop a contract basis with those students to make sure that if you are attending out of zone, that you're definitely following the attendance rules, participation rules with the instruction, good behavior, and all that kind of stuff. Well, I've typically tried to make sure that we work with families as much as possible for them to stay in the school zone that they want to be in. However, we may have to have a little different philosophy in approving those as we go into this year because of the health reasons that we've mentioned.
Well, we're still dealing with an unknown number of people coming back. And I think I would suggest that you pursue what you're doing, and we take a look at it once we get a final number on who's going to be attending. And, you know, it's hard to do it when we're, just pulling numbers out of the air.
Well, again, we're pulling the best numbers that we have currently. One of the challenges we're going to have opening school is if 50% participation rate in a survey is the best I've ever seen. I mean, the amount of participation in this survey has been phenomenal. However, it's not great as far as planning reopening school, because we don't know who's going to attend remotely and who's not. And so that is going to be the challenge that we're going to face as we reopen schools, is trying to determine who's going to ride a bus, who's going to come fully in person, who's going to come remotely, who's going to change their mind if we have 5 cases overnight up here in Bristol. I mean, the unknown is going to be as big a challenge as the virus. As you said, the virus is unknown, but the unknown variables it creates are going to be a challenge for us this upcoming year as well. But I don't know how we could get more firm numbers than to look at the numbers of the students that we currently had last year. One of our principals that the schools mentioned is actually calling the students in the grade level that was going to be negatively impacted to find out if indeed those students are planning to return to help in that process. But to be able to say we could make this redistricting occur, and it just coincidentally, the students who were going to do remote learning were all in one classroom, and we could have 3 kids in one classroom in person, and the classroom right beside it have, 18 in person with only 3 remote. There's going to be a lot of unknowns like that we're going to have to adjust on the fly.
Well, our responsibility is to educate the children the best we can in the safest manner that we can. And if it requires that we change boundaries on school zones, then I'm for it.
So continue, I'd say continue what you're doing and talk to as many parents as you can, or get as much information as you can, and let us know as soon as possible, because we can't wait too much longer to make a decision one way or the other. And I think as a board, that's something that we need to do and not pass the buck down to somebody else. I think that needs to come from us. So do what you need to do, and then let us know, and then we'll go from there.
I agree. Good with that.
All right? Thank you very much, and thanks for the great discussion.
Okay. Next item, discussion of changing school start times.
Mr. Chairman, again, going back to a topic that we have avoided addressing because consolidation has been close. I think most members of the board, maybe not Mr. Goodpasture, but I think the rest of you know that for about 18 months, we've had a school start time committee. Governor Northam, as he first came into office, one of the challenges he issued to the school boards was that if your high school and middle school students were starting school at an early morning hour, to reconsider that, because the research is very clear that older adolescents learn more and have higher achievement gains if they start a little bit later in the day. Currently, we start as early as any school division I've been associated with at high school, starting at 7:40, and we've had discussions about potentially flip-flopping and having our elementary school students start earlier. As we began our leadership team planning, the topic of discussion came up that it may be a good time to really consider this because of the limited number of pupils that we'll be having, that we'll be able to have on our school buses. So rather than me look at that, I asked Ms. Vault and Mr. Matlock to work with Mr. Buckles to do some. Ms. Jones, if you will go to the PowerPoint that's on there rather than their notes. I did provide you with their notes just for your information, but the PowerPoint, we'll go through that. But Mr. Buckles, Mr. Matlock, and Ms. Vault went through and come up with some pros and cons for changing the start time. And I'll go over those with you currently as well. As you know, the best case scenario, the CDC recommends that we only have 11 students on buses. We have over 70 in some situations, and so the practicality of that is impossible. However, if we follow the World Health Organization's recommendations for social distancing and set students in an alternating, staggering window aisle fashion, we can get up to 22 students. However, for those, but all of our buses have more than 22, except for our special runs, and so we're going to be looking at doing multiple runs for each elementary run and each middle and high school run in order to get students to school on time. And so what we know that is for those bus routes that have over 70 students on it, we may actually have to do 3 runs to get those students to school. And part of the recommendation, and is also going to take longer to do those runs because we are going to perform temperature checks on every student before they get on the bus. And then potentially if a student tests, they have a temperature above 100 degrees, and their parent didn't walk them to the bus stop, there will be a time delay in getting that student back to their parent. So as you can see, our community is going to have to work with us very closely this year and be very patient because our bus routes are not going to be as timely as they normally are. one of the recommendations came out that it would be better for elementary students it would be safer to have the younger children, elementary students, on the first bus runs in the morning and start the school day before the older students, because we know that there's going to be time delays and lags because of station, and I would prefer to have a middle and a high school student have a extended delay waiting on the bus than I would an elementary student. So that was one station of the bus before the next round of students come in, and so we'll need at least an hour between the start of elementary runs and the start of middle and high school runs. And so in order to make all that happen and to keep teachers within their contracted hours, we're recommending, while we're in phase 3, to reduce the instructional day by 30 minutes and make up for that with remote learning. And so if we did follow this plan, this is an approximate recommended schedule, is that we would start elementary school around 8 o'clock and finish up at 2:30, knowing that bus routes are going to take longer in both the morning and the afternoon. Our high school and middle school would start around 9 o'clock and finish around 3:30. If you look at typically the length of those days would be 30 minutes longer, but if we want to keep teachers within their contracted hours and we want to provide supervision for the kids while they're waiting on the bus, we're going to have to do something, and that's either pay teachers more to work longer hours or reduce our instructional days so that our actual instructional days so teachers can provide supervision for students while they're either arriving early in the morning or waiting for the bus to pick them up in the afternoon. Some other options to consider this was one of the big topics as our committee looked over changing our start times over the last 18 months, is some of our older students are responsible for the afternoon care of younger students. In our survey, that was a very small percentage of the families who responded to the survey. However, we do think that we can make some accommodations to those families. For example, if an older student needs to provide care for a younger student, we could let that student have the last period of the day free. We could also have elementary siblings who depended on their older siblings for child care to, instead of getting off at their house the first time the bus went through, they could stay on the bus and sit in the seat with their older sibling in the afternoon route, so they would have supervision that way. We also know that parents would have concerns about adjusting those start times as well, and so one of the things that we would have to do is would extend the car rider line hours. Currently, I think we start at 7:45 or 7:50 at our elementary schools, allowing parents to drop off. We may have to do that earlier in the morning or make those drop-off times longer in order to make the entire plan work, not just the school start times. And then finally, after-school care for students, because if students start earlier, they may also get home earlier. And so we are already working with community agencies about providing after-school care for students. Again, we would extend car rider line hours. For our high school students, we may allow teams to have workouts early in the morning so that those students could arrive to school earlier, or we could even reinstate a 0 period if necessary for students to come in earlier if they're high school students if need to. Of course, we do have some after-school programs. We're unsure about the federal funding for those, but that could also be implemented where applicable. But anyway, I would like for our board to provide some discussion and some guidance about whether these times, keep in mind these times are not exact, they're just an idea or a template, but before we make a decision as significant as flip-flopping which of our grade levels start sooner, I think it warrants a board discussion and definitely some of your direction.
Question. On the, you mentioned something about students staying on the bus to ride with their older sibling. Is that like the elementary between the high school?
Correct.
So wouldn't that be an issue if they were going to clean and sanitize?
Yes, for that period of time, that student would have to get off the bus while the sanitation process happened. I'm going to tell you, there's no good solution. Whether we keep our start times as they are, we're going to have issues. If we flip-flop our start times, we're going to have issues. The real issue here is safety, and we know that there's going to be delays. And if we're going to have, the real, to me, the decision point here is who do you want waiting at the bus stop if we have delays early in the morning? Do you want it to be a kindergartner waiting 30 or 45 minutes, possibly for the bus to get there, or would you prefer to have a 9th or an 11th grader waiting for that bus to get there early in the morning? I mean, to me, that is the crux of the decision. I think research says that academically we should do this anyway, but from a safety standpoint, I believe it is the best option for our school division moving forward.
And you're right, I just don't like the idea of getting a kid on the bus and then making that kid either get off while we're clean just to wait on a sibling. I think we need to come up with something better than that. My next question is athletics. Is it going to be that big of a deal with high school getting out at 3:35 as far as practice? I know some of them do work out in the mornings, but there are still some that work out in the evenings and or have to travel to away games or something like that. Is that going to be...
Same for band. One of the things that we talked about originally in the committee was trying to schedule not athletic study halls, advanced PE, the weightlifting classes we have for band, scheduling band at the end of the day. So when you do have to have an early dismissal, it affects the class that they're participating in related to the extracurricular. And so I think that would be something that we would definitely have to consider working with students' schedules to make that work. It would, with this schedule getting out at 3:30, and if we have a 5 o'clock start for a JV game at Bluefield, obviously we're going to have to dismiss that group of students a little bit earlier. But even as we are now dismissing 30 minutes earlier than that, we already have to have a significant number of early dismissals because of the conference we play in. It'd just be a matter of an additional 30 minutes. So we are going to have to be very creative about how we schedule those students at the end of the day, regardless. But keep in mind, getting those students to their games is going to be trouble anyway because we're going to have extended bus routes in the afternoon, and we depend on our regular route drivers to drive some of those teams to their games. And so just because we can get out of school earlier don't mean there's going to be a bus ready to take those students to Bluefield. And this is a little bit more important for us to kind of get direction from the board tonight, because Mr. Buckles cannot build his transportation schedule until he knows which level is going to start school first. And so we don't necessarily need a vote on this, but it would be good to have your direction, because Bill is really kind of waiting at this point to determine how he's going to make his bus routes operate.
Well, I listened to this schedule change last week when you had the initial opening program here, and it makes sense. I mean, the high school students would be tickled to death not to have to get to school until 9:30 or 9 o'clock. And I mean, this is a painless decision here. I think it makes sense educationally and safety-wise.
Yeah, I don't think you can expect to keep a kindergartner, first grader waiting on the bus in the morning for 30 minutes. That's just not a risk that needs to be part of the equation as far as I'm concerned.
I think it's something we've talked about before, and and studies show as well that we were kind of doing it backwards anyway. So I think it'd be a good time to do that. I mean, there are some challenges in there. I agree with Mr. Foster. You know, that was my first thought. So if we got a child that's waiting on a bus that has to be cleaned an hour in between a run, what are we gonna do with that child? You know, that was my first thought, you know.
But they won't be waiting an hour. We won't start, I mean, they may be waiting, I don't know, what do you think, Bill, 5 to 7 minutes to get those buses sanitized? The hour is between when the bus route starts for elementary and the bus routes start for middle and high school. So it won't be a full hour, it'll just be a 5-minute period. But still, I still don't like that. Yeah, I'm with you. But yeah, I didn't want people to think we're going to have kids standing out in the rain for an hour waiting on the bus to get clean.
Yeah, I think no matter what we do, the busing's going to be a terrible situation. So I think whatever Bill can work out at the end, I mean, it's the best thing to do. It's going to be, I mean, just as everything else has been with this, it'll be changing on the fly. I mean, we got great folks and very flexible folks, and I mean, we'll get it done. I don't know about that, but I think it's time we need to go ahead and do the change.
Okay, anything else? Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I will just say that we will begin the process of planning this, keeping the board duly informed throughout the entire process. And our families too. We'll make sure that parents know that we're working towards this and that more detail will follow very quickly. But as we develop these plans, we'll make sure that y'all are in the loop and know before anybody else does.
Thank you.
So did your committee actually speak with parents off the record?
Well,
Kind of like saying
about
this is what
changing
we're
start
doing.
times, if you'll remember, we did a survey on this. We didn't have as much participation for that survey as we did for this one, but we've already surveyed parents and stakeholders about this topic in the past. I mean, we're making so many decisions because of COVID-19 that we would have never dreamed of making. I mean, who would have ever thought that we're going to take every child's temperature as they get on the bus, as they walk in the building? I mean, but that's where we are. But our staff, I didn't think it was possible, but our staff believes that it is because they know how important it is for our children and our community to get those students back in-person instruction when we can do so in a safe and healthy way. Currently, I believe we can do that. Let's pray that our community continues to stay healthy as it has. But if not, we'll have backup plans for backup plans and be prepared for whatever comes at us. We hope.
Thank you. Okay, next up is public comment. I've got one card, Kiana Court. Is that correct? She had to leave.
Check.
Anyone else? Okay, that takes us to a closed session. Mr. White, would you read us in?
Sure will. Pursuant to section 2.2, 37111A1A8 of the Code of Virginia, I move that the board convene a closed meeting for the purpose of discussing the following matters. Discussion of personnel is authorized by section 2.2-37111A1 of the Code of Virginia in consultation with legal counsel retained by the public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel is authorized by section 2.2-37111A8 of the Code of Virginia, specifically the discussion of certain personnel recommendation for employment, resignations, and retirements, and the consultation with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters and potential litigation. Second.
Ms. Jones?
Mr. Albus?
Yes.
Mr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Goodpaster?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher?
Yes.